We've been asked to leave the country as soon as possible because of the situation. So I had to change my flights. And the first flight I found was today.
This is 33-year-old British citizen Wafia Ahmed. She's at Rafiq Hariri Airport in Beirut on her way back to London. But she's traveling earlier than she had planned. Another traveler, Sarah Hammoud, was already planning a trip to Ankara to visit her sister. But she's now leaving Lebanon earlier than she thought she would.
Yeah, I did have plans in the middle of August to go and visit my sister, like tourism and stuff. But I decided to change the plans earlier. Kind of scared because of the situation, but it's definitely over-exaggerated. People are over-exaggerating the situation in Lebanon.
They're among many in Lebanon who have chosen to heed warnings by their own and other governments who have told their citizens to leave immediately, at the risk of an all-round escalation of violence in the country. This came after last week's Israeli strike on Beirut that killed Hezbollah commander Fuad Shukr. Since then, Hezbollah, of course, had vowed to retaliate, causing widespread speculation and anticipation about what would happen next. But so far, the overwhelming sentiment seems to be uncertainty rather than fear.
It wasn't unsafe, but obviously the news and the threatenings that we heard every day, that did put pressure on us to leave. But I live in South Lebanon where all these things are happening, and I didn't feel unsafe, to be fair. It was okay. Although we were hearing the bombings and stuff and we could see it, but it wasn't unsafe.
I'm leaving now just for my family's concern so that they're not worried and stuff. But me personally, I'm not that much worried that anything is going to happen. And that's the news that people abroad hear. Okay, so just before yesterday, I was on a night out, everything's fine. So it's Lebanon is cut in half. Some people are scared, some people are not. So.
Either way, the situation is taking a toll on people's lives.
It's breaking my heart because I'm leaving my partner here because he's not a British citizen, so he's not able to leave with me. So yeah, I'm worried what if things will kick off here and he start.
It's also causing a huge surge in ticket prices in an already suffering Lebanese economy.
I mean, the last month I booked for my mom, it was $100, and yesterday I was checking, it was $700, $600 difference.
This is Beyond the Headlines, and I'm your host, Nada Al-Tahir. This week, we take a look at the impact inside Lebanon of brewing regional escalations as Hezbollah and Israel continue to exchange threats that grow more and more serious every day.
I would like to point out in the beginning that the enemy could try to disturb this commemoration during this speech, and it shows that they have a small brain to try and break the sound barrier over Dahiyah, to provoke or scare the people in this commemoration.
On Tuesday, Israeli jets broke the sound barrier in the skies of Lebanon just minutes before Hezbollah leader Hassan Nasrallah was scheduled to speak. By then, Hezbollah and Israel had been exchanging threats in a geopolitical and military context that is more tense than usual. In his address, Nasrallah mocked what he called Israel's intimidation attempt and said that the suspense of a potential retaliation is part of the, quote, punishment that the group is inflicting on Israel. Speaking to me now from Beirut is the National's correspondent, Nada Atallah. Nada, it seems people in Lebanon have different expectations about how serious the situation actually is. The sonic boom on Tuesday, which you yourself heard, caused a heightened sense of panic. Describe to us what the mood is like in Lebanon right now. Are people afraid? Are they panicking? Are they anxious? Or do they not care and they're used to it?
It did spark a sense of panic. Even if Hassan Nasrallah said he mocked the sonic booms there. It was a bit of stressful for a couple of minutes, but then we got used to it, I think. So yeah, the mood in Lebanon and in Beirut, I'll say, is tense. You have a sense of fatigue, people feel helpless, but also at the same time, there's an impression of normality. So it's a very weird atmosphere where most social events won't be cancelled, people will still go out. Even in Tyres, which is in south of Lebanon, it's about 20 kilometers from the border, beaches remain crowded. So you've got still the social events are still going on, but at the same time, people are worried. You cannot say they're not taking what's happening seriously. So they're worried. And it's a bit intangible as well, because you can't really see how it's being materialized, but it's a bit in the atmosphere. Like, there's a couple of things that also are visible in Beirut. You see more and more people stockpiling in case there's a wider conflict that's going to happen. Also, I guess the mood of the atmosphere is different where you're in Beirut or in the south suburb, for instance, because there are areas that are much more likely to be targeted in case of a full-scale war.
So psychologically, you said that people are torn between feeling tense and feeling used to it. But do you feel that this is different than things have been, say, before October 7? Or is it just the way that things have been since?
It's much more tense, definitely, than the past couple of months. I think the recent escalation has made things much more real for Lebanese. Like, it's definitely the highest tension we've felt for the past couple of months. But still, it's not Lebanon's first crisis. So I'll say that people are still somehow used to it, even though no one should be used to this level of stress, of course. So generally, I'll say they're staying calm. I'll say that, for instance, when we were at the airport, so some Lebanese expats were leaving, some families were like cutting their trips short because foreign embassies were calling for their citizens to return. So they were saying they were worried, but I did not feel this very like widespread sense of panic.
Nada, Lebanon has already been dealing with an economic crisis, and we've seen the prices of tickets at least skyrocket since all of this has happened. How has all of this impacted Lebanon economically? How are people coping? Are they struggling? Are the prices of anything else different?
So for now, I have not seen like drastic increase of prices. But it is true that the economic situation made it harder for some Lebanese to take the necessary precautions for like stockpiling supplies or even thinking of relocating to safer areas in case of full-scale conflict. So it's true that ensuring your safety is a privilege and not everyone has it, especially in the light of the economic crisis. Lebanon is also extremely unequal. So some people, it's hard to generalize. Some people will be very wealthy and will not be facing any issues. But for others, it might be very difficult. And so I was in the south a couple of weeks ago, and I was talking to people who were living next to active shelling. And they were telling me they just could not afford to leave. They wanted to, but it was a family, and they were telling me, but where would we go? Now, the rent is very expensive elsewhere. We have no money. The state is not able to pay any compensation. We're completely forgotten, so we have to stay there.
Since the war, Lebanese people have had mixed reactions towards it. So some people were in vocal support of Gaza, but others were a bit more wary about Lebanon getting dragged into this conflict. Over the passage of time, have you seen that people have become more united, say, on a certain stance, or are people still very much divided?
I think it's kind of stayed the same. Lebanon is extremely polarized, especially when it comes to Hezbollah, when it comes to the Palestinian resistance, and I think it stayed the same through the months. You have supporters of Hezbollah who said that they will follow Hassan Nasrallah, whatever he says. You have people within the group and also people within Hamas who are like pushing for like a more like stronger retaliation and like a war with Israel. But I think the majority of Lebanese are against the war, and they would, because they would say that Lebanon cannot afford a war, like as it's in the middle of an economic crisis. It's a tiny country with no financial resources. So, but generally, I say people will still denounce Israel and will still say they're supporting the Palestinian cause, but they will also say that it's not their war.
What are people saying about Hezbollah's threats to retaliate? Are they even talking about it?
Everyone is talking about it. There's this feeling of like building up like anticipation of what's going to happen. So everyone is talking about it. As an example, I was watching the Nasrallah speech from my house in Ashrafiyeh, which is a Christian neighborhood. And everyone else, like all my neighbors, I could hear from their flats. Everyone was listening. So there is a feeling of like tension and anticipation of what's going to happen.
Lebanon is not obviously unfamiliar with war, especially one that's between Hezbollah and Israel. A lot of people you probably know still remember what it was like in 2006, and they remember the toll that it took on them. Are these people kind of making any comparisons between the different experiences, or are they saying that things are going to be different this time?
I think the memory of the 2006 war is still pretty much here. But I think the difference, what people would tell me, is that in 2006, it was a month, it was awful, but it started in the second, and then it finished after a month. Here, that's like 10 months of uncertainty, 10 months of stress, of not knowing what's going to happen, of 10 months also of this border conflict, which displaced 100,000 people who have no idea what they're going to do in the next months. I have no idea when it's going to finish. So you have this dragging anxiety and this building up that's very different from the 2006 Israel-Hezbollah war.
The psychological warfare of a potentially imminent war between Israel and Hezbollah is undoubtedly taking a personal toll on people, but it's also affecting the political dynamics in the country. I spoke to Michael Young, senior editor at the Carnegie Middle East Center in Beirut, about the implications of this for Lebanon internally. Michael, there has been speculation about the threat of a wider regional war, but what impact will this actually have on Lebanon's internal security situation, and how much of this were we expecting since the start of the war in Gaza and the subsequent events that have taken place since?
Well, what worries me most in terms of the internal situation is that if the country is destroyed in a major war, it's the sectarian social contract in Lebanon, to my mind, it has reached virtually its end. I mean, you have today communities in the country, by which I mean specifically here the Christian community, that by and large no longer really feels that it feels at a disadvantage in the country. Many Christians are increasingly thinking of alternative structures for the country. They want to distance themselves from the centralized state, so they're thinking of things like federalism. Some are thinking of partition. The point I'm trying to make is that the sectarian social contract is really under very strong stress. And in this context, if there is a major destructive war that essentially is going to be blamed on one community and one party, namely the Shia community and Hezbollah and their allies, it's going to be very difficult to put together the country again. Now, it doesn't mean that the country will fall apart and everyone will but the thing is, at the heart of the country will be essentially a disagreement, a fundamental refusal by one community to go along with this strategy, which is to place Lebanon within the Iranian camp in regional wars.
Lebanon has long been a victim of its multi-faction divides. How are power struggles in the country adding more tensions to an already tense situation? And is the situation actually uniting people's loyalty to Lebanon above all else?
No, look, the situation has been a bit strange in the last 10 months. Because, of course, Lebanon is divided, but no one has wanted to openly go attack Hezbollah for having effectively opened a front without consulting anyone else. I mean, there have been some parties who have been more critical of Hezbollah, but at the same time, they haven't really escalated the rhetoric against Hezbollah on the belief that if the country is completely divided, this doesn't really benefit Lebanon. All it does, it creates a greater sectarian divide. And I'm speaking specifically here, for example, of the Lebanese Forces, which is a Christian party, which has been more critical of Hezbollah. But at the same time, no one has come out and actively sought to make a big deal of their disagreements with Hezbollah. However, if there is a war and major destruction, you can expect that there will be more criticism of Hezbollah and more open criticism. We have to remember something. In 2006, there was major destruction of Lebanon, and Hezbollah came out of that month-long war and basically mobilized the Shia community against the other Lebanese communities. It led to a long period of tension in which the Shia felt that they were betrayed by the other communities. I think everyone is cognizant of what happened then and doesn't want to make the mistake today of, again, heightening the paranoia in the Shia community. But as I said, if there is major destruction of the country, then, of course, I think, as I said, you will see much more open criticism. People saying, why on earth did you drag us into a war for Gaza? Why? And I don't think Hezbollah has a good answer for that.
Everyone's watching to see what Hezbollah will do after Israel killed its commander, in a strike that also killed 2 children. But technically, the exchange of fire has not actually stopped. Hezbollah is still firing rockets into northern Israel, and Israel is still conducting strikes on Lebanon's south, killing several people. On Tuesday, several drones from Lebanon breached Israeli airspace, and Israel's own interceptors injured 17 people. Is this a test by Hezbollah of Israel's Iron Dome capability? And what is it that we're actually bracing ourselves for here exactly?
You're right. In the last 24 hours, there has been sort of an escalation in terms of what Hezbollah has done using drones against, for the first time near Akka. Now, the thing is, we have to understand something. The rules of the engagement between Hezbollah and the Israelis have by and large been respected by Hezbollah. The fact of the matter is, Hezbollah has always seen this front in the south as a support front for Gaza. Therefore, it has not wanted to escalate the war in Lebanon to the point where, there is effectively a war between Israel and Lebanon, the possibility of an Israeli invasion, major destruction of the country. It is a support front. This is what Nasrallah described it as in one of his first speeches. But what happened is the Israelis on several occasions have actually breached the rules of engagement. They hit the southern suburbs twice, the first time killing Saleh Haruri, one of the main Hamas leaders, and they did it again last week. And in response to this, Nasrallah said, things have changed. The nature of the fighting has changed. And I think what we saw yesterday with this attack of 3 drones, it was an effort, I think, by Hezbollah to show that in the future, they may engage in coordinated action against Israel using many drones, which of course may overwhelm the Iron Dome system. And what we also saw yesterday, of course, is that apparently, as you said, Israel tried to intercept drones and may have missed it. And the Israeli missile, the interceptor missile, actually landed and injured Israelis. But I think it's an effort by Hezbollah to show in what direction a conflict with Israel could go.
Hezbollah has been adamant that Israel will face a serious blow after the assassination of its commander. Lebanon's own government has condemned the Israeli strike on Beirut, but it's now also saying that it's working to prevent a Hezbollah response that could start a wider war. Does the Lebanese government actually have any influence over Hezbollah's de-escalation or retaliation attempts?
I don't think so. I think if there is any influence, it's quite minimal. And what do we mean by the Lebanese government? The Lebanese government, the Lebanese state, of course, you have the government and you have the prime minister, but you also have the speaker of parliament. You have parliament, who is himself a Hezbollah ally. And so, no, I don't think we're going to see we should imagine that the Lebanese government is going to make any change in Hezbollah's decision-making when it comes to this conflict. Hezbollah basically opened the front without asking anybody, without asking certainly not the Lebanese government. So this is very much Hezbollah's war.
What are the implications of a potential Hezbollah-Israel war on Lebanon's ability to pick up the pieces and maybe secure international aid for reconstruction? How will its already severe economic crisis be impacted in the long run?
Already there have been dozens of villages in southern Lebanon that have been destroyed. Who will be paying for them? I don't know. I mean, unless there is some kind of package deal in which maybe a Gulf country can come in and finance reconstruction, as happened in 2006, when the Qataris rebuilt, for example, the town of Bint Jbeil. Unless you have something like that, it's not clear. I mean, Lebanon is indeed bankrupt as a country. Our economy, we're still in the midst of a major economic crisis. Our banking sector doesn't function. So exactly how the country is going to get out of this is a big question mark. And this is what worries, of course, many Lebanese.
We talked a lot about the internal situation, but could a retaliation by Hezbollah actually jeopardize Lebanon's relationship abroad, specifically with its Western allies?
That's a good question. I think the question really is what kind of retaliation? And this is what everyone is focusing on. Hezbollah retaliates against military targets. As it's tried to do throughout this 10-month period, it's focused on military targets. Then I think it's absorbable, okay? In other words, it would be a case where Israel breached the red lines and killed a major Hezbollah leader in the southern suburbs of Beirut, as well as a number of civilians. Therefore, it would be acceptable I think to many people, they may not say this openly, but if Hezbollah retaliates against a military target, I think many countries would say, okay, let's just call it a day. Why don't you take the blow and let's not escalate this further? And the question is, what kind of retaliation Hezbollah will engage in? Will it be in coordination with Iran? Will it be separate from Iran? What kind of destruction will happen in Israel? Will civilians be killed? All these questions are going to affect the Israeli response, and therefore the way the international community then afterward comes to Israel and tells Israel either not to escalate further or whatever. Everything is in the nature of the response.
On Tuesday, Hamas announced Yahya Sinwar, who is obviously one of Israel's most wanted members of Hamas, as its new leader, following the assassination of Ismail Haniyeh last week. What is the impact of Yahya Sinwar leadership and appointment on all of that's going on?
Sinwar's appointment as the new head of Hamas is very interesting, because my belief is that October 7th may have been an effort by Sinwar, it may have been planned as a power play on his part to actually marginalize the leaders in exile, people like Haniyeh and Mash'al, in the context of what is known as the unity of the arena strategy that Hezbollah and the Iranians have presented. So the fact that now Sinwar has been effectively appointed as the head of Hamas effectively seems to suggest that his plan has succeeded. The fact of the matter is the Israelis went and killed Haniyeh, and now they have to face someone even who is much more radical than Haniyeh. So, this has been the case, but this is exactly what the Israelis want to do. They always want to ensure that the person sitting across the table for them are the most radical elements, so that they can then turn around and tell their own public and tell the Americans, look, we have no interlocutor to deal with. Our interlocutors are too radical for us to negotiate with them. And in that way, Israel escapes making any kind of concessions. So it's a victory today for Sinwar to be appointed. It's also, I think, a victory for Benjamin Netanyahu.
That's it from Beyond the Headlines. For up-to-the-minute coverage on this story, head to thenationalnews.com. This episode was produced by Ben Barqawi, Matt Kiniston, and Arthur Edison. Yasmin Al-Taji is the assistant producer, and Dua Farid is our editor. And I'm your host, Nadal Tahir.